Hello, my name is JP Colson, and I am honored today to be sitting down with Dr. Rich Byrne, my former chairman, now the chair of neurosurgery down at Mayo Jacksonville in Jacksonville, Florida. This is a conversation for the AANS series Leaders in Neurosurgery. And for anyone watching or listening who has partaken of these conversations, you may be surprised because typically the interviewers in this series have been luminaries such as Jacques Morcos, Mike Lawton, even Sanjay Gupta. And instead, Dr. Byrne was kind enough to invite me to interview him for this series. Continuing a long tradition he has since the day he matched me of tapping me for jobs for which I am woefully unqualified. But we've had a few conversations in the past, and so hopefully we can bear some fruit here today, digging into Dr. Byrne's past, his views on the field of neurosurgery, where it was, where it is, and where it may still go. Dr. Byrne, for anyone who has not had the privilege to meet you as I have, or doesn't know of you or your work, we're going to talk about Dr. Byrne, the neurosurgeon, today. But how would you introduce yourself to anyone listening, just as Dr. Byrne, the guy?
Well, first off, thanks for the invitation and for agreeing to do this interview. Yeah, there's some fancy people that do some of these interviews, but none of them are podcasters like you are, except for maybe Sanjay. I think he does a podcast for CNN.
Yeah, he has that side job aside from the neurosurgery thing.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm looking forward to see what you do with your career, and I suspect you'll be a leader in neurosurgery as well. As far as, well, how do I introduce myself? Rich Byrne, the guy. I would just say a kid from the south side of Chicago, with all of the things that come with that. Um, I guess maybe a blue collar attitude. I like to work hard. Very practical, um, and there you have it.
And we'll get into that, what that means being from the south side of Chicago, what your upbringing was like. I do want to point out for the viewers the irony of this conversation. Now that you have moved on to your new job down there at Mayo Jacksonville, you are calling in from my hometown of Jacksonville, Florida. And
Yeah.
here I sit still in residency at Rush in your hometown of Chicago, Illinois. So we've swapped and we're having this conversation on January 19th. So I think right now you're definitely winning in terms of the location choice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's 60 something. After this, I'll be going for a long run. Um, you know, I don't know. I don't know what it's like in Chicago right now. I just spoke with my wife, and she said it was pretty cold. No, I love where I mean, I live in Ponte Vedra Beach now. It's 10-minute commute to the hospital. The campus, Mayo Clinic, Florida, is like it's like Disney World of medicine. It's incredibly beautiful. Um, no more traffic, no more winters. Uh, I will always consider Chicago to be my home, but it's a home that I'll be visiting in the summer
Right.
and
Yeah,
not
it's it's
winter. Yeah,
it's 60 degrees there, and we need about 60 layers to go outside here. But
yeah,
let's talk a little bit about your home, and if I could
sure.
take you back to what your life was like growing up here. I think many people who have known you and worked with you, or who know you through your extensive network in organized neurosurgery, might be curious about where Rich Byrne came from. So, talk a bit about your family life, what the family makeup was like, the home into which you were born and that raised you.
Sure. So, I grew up. I mean, well, first off, I was born at the University of Chicago Hospital. My parents were grad students then and there. First couple of years within a mile of U of C in Hyde Park, and then we moved further south, and then we moved southwest, and where I spent most of my time from age of 7 to 18 was a place called Beverly, which is a beautiful, wonderful neighborhood, southwest part of Chicago, but a very, very Irish Catholic, and all of the stereotypes of Irish Catholic were true, and I was part of that, I suppose. I can't say I'm religious anymore, but that was certainly a part of it. Um, and I, it was it was mostly, it was kind of half blue collar, half white collar neighborhood, but a beautiful neighborhood. Millions of kids.
Mm,
Most of my friends had 5 to 7 or more siblings, and I had one brother. So right off the bat, we were sort of odd birds. Having such a small family, they just didn't know. Well, why did you stop?
yeah.
And the answer to that is my parents were grad students. There's limitations in time, limitations in money, and a different worldview, I suppose. And so I fit in and didn't quite fit into the neighborhood, um, but I loved it, and I still have so many close friends from that area. That'll always be where I think about when I think about where I grew up.
Mm. And so you have one brother. He's older or younger than you?
He's older than me, um, and he followed the family pattern. He got a PhD. Everyone in my family gets a PhD except for me, and he travels internationally. He's almost never in the United States. He comes back once a year. We do an Ironman triathlon together whenever he comes back into town. And this is his last adventure. Spoke with him yesterday. He's coming back and he's going to be living in DC for the rest of his career. And then hopefully he's going to move down here to Jacksonville. And we're sort of setting up the epicenter of our family here, really in Ponte Vedra Beach.
Well, there are worse places to do that.
Oh,
Where
yeah.
is the next Ironman going to be?
We did Florida a few months ago. I think we're going to do Chattanooga next year. Chattanooga's wonderful. It's only about a 5 hour drive from here. Um,
Yeah.
I've done it before. Love that race.
Phenomenal. So going back to the childhood home, you said that your family were somewhat misfits
Mhm.
in the neighborhood, the smaller number of children, both parents in graduate school, and
Yeah.
you, I guess, were somewhat of misfit among misfits in that you didn't follow the path into the research of the PhD land. But what was the environment like in the house when you were a kid?
Uh, Constant sounds of classical music in the background. It was on, I don't know, 16 hours a day.
Hmm.
My parents were, that's what they like. They love classical music, music of the Baroque, symphony, all sorts of. I mean, I have an appreciation for it, but that wasn't uh, what I was really, really liking. And I couldn't stand opera, and they went to the opera all the time. So yeah, I was far less sophisticated, but than my parents, and remain so.
Well, anyone who's been in your OR knows you're a big fan of the Moody Blues, so
Yes, yeah,
maybe the symphonic sound found its way into your taste through them.
maybe, yes, yeah. That sort of alternate classic rock stuff was. I still love that, but I have a great appreciation for classical music. It's just that that's not what I want to listen to when I'm out running or that sort of thing.
Right. So you're in a household surrounded by academics.
Mhm.
What was the expectation for you, and what were your plans as a young man for what you'd make of yourself?
Yeah, education first. My parents really didn't care about me playing sports. They typically didn't attend my sports events. That was not on the, my father, having produced two sons who do Ironman triathlons. The last time my father ran was basic training, 1948. Yeah, he was always in his study, smoking a pipe and doing some research. And my mother was not really interested in that sort of stuff either. So. Um, I would say that the emphasis was on education, and it was expected that you're going to get an advanced degree. It's up to you to figure out what that is. And I was a frequent flyer in the local emergency rooms because I played a lot of sports and I, I always played like I was 250 pounds and I was 100 pounds lighter. So I spent a lot of time in the emergency room with a variety of fractures and lacerations and uh, all sorts of things. So I found that environment enticing and interesting, and my the, the 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 conversations in the house would be sort of circular and might not reach a conclusion. And I wanted to have a very practical career where I knew exactly what I was doing and saw the outcomes of what I was doing immediately.
So that was the bump toward medicine for you.
That's right.
Okay. And so for a lot of people, some are drawn to medicine or clinical work. Their families are in medicine, and then they go forth. They know that they want to treat patients, but they don't know quite what yet. Some people are right out of the gate enamored with a particular organ system, a particular job. When you decided to be a physician, was it a simultaneous decision to be a neurosurgeon or a surgeon at all, or what did you
Not at
expect
all.
going in?
I didn't know, but I did. You had to have been there, but the 70s and the 80s, transplant surgery was really grabbing the headlines because it was dramatic, life-saving, and I thought maybe when I went to medical school I'd do transplant surgery. But as fate would have it, the first week of medical school at Northwestern, I went out to dinner with two neurosurgeons, not two transplant surgeons, and Lenny Cerullo and Tom Brown, and they had a huge effect on me and my career. And they saw that I was interested in neuroscience. I had just read the book "The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat" by
Mm,
Oliver
I was
Sacks.
like,
So I was fascinated by neuroscience, and they invited me into the OR that first week, and I went, and I never left, and forgot about transplant surgery, and really never thought about anything else, except that towards the end of medical school, I went through the usual, like, are you really going to do this?
yeah.
Every other night call until it turns into every night call. I mean, is that what your future is going to be? And I thought about doing ophthalmology. I thought about ENT. I thought about, anything but neurosurgery, just very briefly. My good friend Dean Carhalios, I think you've probably met Dean,
Mhm.
was also trying to talk himself out of neurosurgery, and he was trying to think about orthopedics. And we met one time in the OR locker room at Northwestern. We were third year medical students, and Dean said to me, "You're only thinking about ophthalmology or ENT because it's close to the brain." And and I told him, "You're only thinking about orthopedic surgery because you get to do spine surgery." And we looked at each other, nodded, and both came to the conclusion, just do neurosurgery. And that's what we did.
Strong case.
Yeah.
So when you were deciding first the path of medical school instead of graduate school, and then that long and arduous path of neurosurgery, what was the reaction like with your family? Were they supportive? Did they understand what you were embarking on with that long road to neurosurgery?
No, I mean, PhD grad school drags on forever too.
Hmm.
There's no call with it. But it was really up to me. I mean, they never micromanaged my life, my career. I was, it's the opposite of the current helicopter parent.
Mm,
My parents, I mean, I could disappear for days, they might not notice. They
yeah.
just kind of let us go, and they had their own stuff going on, and child rearing back in the 70s was quite a bit more Darwinian. Yeah. If they're meant to come back tonight, they will. If they're not, that's just the way, the way it works.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but everything worked out.
Well, that another good reason for having more kids in your neighborhood. Then you've got spares.
Well, yeah, well, I know one family had 22 kids.
Wow.
Dr. Blau had 22 kids. Yeah.
Wow.
Hmm.
Okay, well then let's dive into the residency. You trained at Rush in a time that Chicago was a very different place. Rush was a very different place. But tell us a little bit about what that environment was like. What drew you to Rush when you were making your rank list, and what the experience was like for you when you think back on it.
Sure. I assumed that I would leave Chicago. I assumed in medical school, I interviewed at 17 programs. And my rank list going into the final week looked very different than the rank list I submitted. Going into the final week, I did not have a Chicago program in my top 10. Um, and I'd spoken with a few different department chairs, and I was probably going to end up going to a different program. And then Thursday night, before I had to submit my list Friday morning at the post office, there was no email then. I went out to play pool at the corner pocket with a bunch of friends from grade school, high school, college, and they all shamed me for even thinking about leaving Chicago. How dare you? You can't leave all of us, all of this. And the next morning, I changed my rank list and I moved the Chicago programs up, and that's really how it happened. Of course, in retrospect, within 5 to 10 years, most of those guys left Chicago.
Right.
So that's a lesson. That is a lesson, right? They went to Singapore, they went to Germany, they went all France, Ireland, everywhere but Chicago. And I was the guy who stayed,
Yeah.
and until now, I had always figured I was going to leave Chicago at some point. I was fixated on Florida since the age of 8, having gone to Disney World and discovered that November doesn't have to be cold, and that there's things like palm trees and everything is beautiful and warm. And I thought I would eventually move to Florida or somewhere warm, and it only took me, half a century to pull it off, but I finally did.
Yeah. So then you wind up at Rush, which obviously would be your home for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think obviously where we match, where we train, shapes us in so many ways. It's where you spend a very formative number of years of your life, for one thing, and it's the group of people that you're around when you become more fully an adult. You become the surgeon you're going to be, the people who teach you how to be. Um, who are some of the main surgeons, mentors that kind of shaped you and guided you during that time?
Well, I'll start off by saying that my choice of Rush was most profound in that I met my wife,
Hmm.
who was a neurology resident at Rush. And I was on every other night call those months, and she was the first neurology resident, perhaps in the history of Rush Neurology, to voluntarily do a month of neurosurgery. And
Wow.
and that changed my call schedule from every other to every third, and I fell in love with her just for that. Uh, yeah,
And
yeah.
you've owed her ever since.
Oh yeah. No, we have a great time together. We've been together almost 35 years now, and that was the most important thing that I found at Rush. We'll start there. Um, Rush was was a natural choice for me because during medical school at Northwestern on my rotation, I saw an awake mapping case for a left temporal glioma in a young woman. George Sobalski did it, and I was just amazed by what he did and what he could do, and how he could get that woman through that operation. After that operation, I said, "Well, where did you learn that? Where should I learn that?" And he said, "You want to learn how to do this in Chicago, you got to work with Walt Whistler, because Walt was by far the busiest epilepsy surgeon,
Hmm.
cortical mapping awake person in Chicago, and had been for decades." So that's why matching at Rush was a natural for me. It's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do epilepsy, I wanted to do awake mapping glioma surgery, and so Walt Whistler was a very important influence in my career. Besides the fact that he was one of the most moral and ethical men that I've ever met, and a great role model from that standpoint. And I think everybody who ever trained at Rush would say the same. And then Charlie D'Angelo was technically the best neurosurgeon I'd ever worked with, and maybe the best technical surgeon I've ever worked with of any discipline. He was just incredibly good in the operating room. But Charlie didn't really care about the national scene. He,
Mm.
I don't know, he'd probably done 1,000 pituitaries, never wrote up a series. That just wasn't a factor for him. And there are personal reasons for that for Charlie. But he ended up retiring at the age of 54 and just walked away and sadly died of pancreatic cancer 6 years late, 7 years later. Um, so I would say that those are the two biggest influences for me. But also Richard Penn. Richard Penn was a phenomenal scientist, one of the few neurosurgeons who's invented things, one of the few neurosurgeons who's been a first or senior author in New England Journal and JAMA and Science, and he's just an incredible scientist. And I still keep in touch with him. He's the last of that early group that's still with us. Um, and then other people, Jim Ausman, who was on our faculty, he was chairman at UIC, but also on faculty with us. And then I learned a lot over at Cook County Hospital, which was a very, very busy place back in the 90s. It's not so busy these days, maybe about probably half to a third as busy as it was. Um, so, I mean, a lot of great influences. And then I've had so many wonderful mentors through my career. Uh, Really, honestly, too many to mention.
Mm.
But I'm very, very thankful for the way I was treated as a young neurosurgeon, and so many great people had such influence on me. Fred Meyer, one of them. I was on a Zoom call yesterday morning with Fred for an hour and a half. He's dean of Mayo Clinic now, but he was very influential in my career starting in 2005. Um, Certainly Mitch Berger, Tom Arigitano, Hunt Bajer, Bob Dempsey. So many great people have been so wonderful to me, and I'm just uh, all I can think of is I'd like to pay that back to the next generation as they're coming up. So I keep that in my mind that I want to help young surgeons develop their careers, residents, fellows, and young surgeons across the United States. I would just want to pay it back.
Well, that was certainly apparent every moment on the job when you were still with us here at Rush running the show. And in fact, in that vein, I wanted to ask you because obviously where we wind up for residency, sets the course of so many decades that follow. And the way you describe your decision, how at the 11th hour you made that choice of location to stay in this city, and then
Yeah,
within that city you picked the program that was the best fit for your interests. When students in the application process come to you these days and ask for your advice on, oh gosh, how do I make my list, how do I rank
right.
things, you obviously had that experience where you went location, and then within that, what place is the best fit. How do
Yeah,
you advise people today thinking about, you might meet your spouse during residency as you did, where does
yeah.
your family live, what kind of career interests do you have, how do you advise young people to kind of square that circle?
So the first thing I tell anybody that comes for advice in that regard is you went to medical school to be a doctor. And there is a chance that in this most competitive specialty, you might not match.
Hmm.
And if you don't match, it's not the end of the world. Okay. Congratulations, you're going to be a doctor. Um, you might not match, and you'll have to find something else that you're going to do. And that's okay. You're still going to have met your goal. And I've had to have that conversation many times over the last 25 years with people that I've been a mentor for who didn't match, or they'll call me match day very upset, and I just want to put it into perspective for them.
Hmm.
And given the fact that I have two daughters in medical school right now that are starting to think about match, that's very much on my mind, and that's the advice I give them. You are going to be a doctor. Don't worry about the match. It's natural to worry about the match, but you've already met your goal. Second thing is, think about the training more than the geography. I was a bad example of that. But the lesson that I learned was I stayed in Chicago because all of my friends were going to be in Chicago, and then none of them were there.
Right.
So don't don't choose your residency or your career path based on geography. Base it on the training you're likely to get, and you'll meet great people in every city. So don't worry about that. And the next thing is choose a program based on where you think they're going to be in 6 or 7 years, not where they are today.
Hmm.
Programs change. So think about the trajectory of a program. And then finally, it's pretty hard to get bad training in neurosurgery. The ABNS, the Residency Review Committee, police the programs pretty hard. And neurosurgery hands out the most citations by a wide margin of any specialty. They do that to give the program director and department chair ammo to go to the dean to say, look, we need some help here. Not because neurosurgery programs are bad, but because they want the programs to have that to go to the administration to say, give us help with this. So it's hard to get bad training in neurosurgery. So I typically recommend to resident applicants fill out a full list, unless you absolutely would rather not be a neurosurgeon, rather than match someplace. But fill out a full list. You're going to get good training at just about anywhere, with different flavors, different exposures, and so on. But you'll get good training. So that's my advice to most people. And your career path has a lot more to do with you than it has to do with the place you train.
Hmm. Well, before we transition then from talking about your training, I wonder when you look back, because you stayed where you trained, and so you spent so much of your career still in that place, in that hospital, as much as it changed over time and you changed in it. But when you look back at your time in residency, what do you miss the most about being a resident? And I want it, this could be some aspect of your life, but I always wonder, someone who leaves residency, you define your own practice. There are procedures you don't do anymore. That when you were in residency, you got to do this surgery, and now your
Right.
career goes that way, and you may never do XYZ surgery again. So,
Yeah.
are there any cases that you miss doing from when you were in residency that you just haven't done in decades?
Yeah, I mean, I used to do a lot of spine surgery, obviously in training. In the first five
Mm,
years of my practice, I did a lot of spine surgery. I miss that. I love spine surgery. Well chosen spine case, a very satisfying operation.
yeah.
I did a lot of vascular neurosurgery my first couple of years in practice.
Mm,
Um, I can't say that I miss vascular cases anymore. When Demetrius Lopez showed up with his endovascular skills, I happily dropped off the call schedule,
yeah.
because in reality, an aneurysm is it's not it's not an open case anymore. And even when it was an open case, it was an hour of challenging surgery, and then a week or two of what can be very, very difficult post-op care
Yeah.
with vasospasm and hydrocephalus and swelling and all the things that happen to vascular case. So I can't say that I really miss that, but I do miss spine surgery. I have a reverence for spine surgeons. Rick Fessler is going to be here in a couple of hours. He's visiting professor down here at Mayo Clinic, Florida, today and tomorrow. Um, I'm inviting Vince too. Vince will be down. So I would say probably spine surgery. I can't say I miss any aspect of residency training, uh, because it was well before the 80-hour work week, and
Mm,
there was I uh, people shouldn't have to go through that again. The 80-hour work week was, I think, appropriate and necessary, and I, I can't say that I miss any of that. I will say that I miss the simplicity of life. There's something wonderful about owning nothing and only having one thing to do.
yeah.
The more you own things, the more they own you.
Yeah.
You have more
And
things.
that mindset has lived on behind you in the residency. We talk about that a lot, how intern year, PGY 2 year especially, it's very easy. You know exactly I need to be here at this time, do these things, and
Right,
then you just do that on repeat for a year, and
right.
it is simple.
Yeah.
I wonder then, because you and I have talked a lot and we've written a lot about work hour restrictions, residency structure, and so because it comes up, I think many people would agree the 80-hour work week, at least as a ballpark, somewhere to set the limit, and some weeks you're a little over, some you're a little under, but at least to set a limit that everybody can shoot for, reasonable and avoid extreme abuses. But there's now been talk about further restricting work hours per week. And, in neurosurgery, we're in a very different environment than other medical training programs, where there's case volumes that we need to get during our training, and some pathologies are rarer, some things are emergent, and they only come in when they come in, and it's much more important for us as residents to do a certain number of cases and see a certain number of things than perhaps how many hours we're in the hospital, be it the maximum or the minimum. So with some of these talks that have been going on recently about further restricting work hours, how do you see that impacting not just the training in the immediate future in response to that, but we'll look far ahead, neurosurgery 20 years from now, 25 years from now? Do you worry about a trickle down effect?
Yeah, so I will have to go to the example of the European training, you know.
Yes.
So depending on where you're at, 54 or 48 hours, um, and then what does that mean? Well, inevitably, it means you'll have seen less in any given time. I mean, it's simple math. So you can either extend the training, making it longer, or you can train and finish greener and then require more senior supervision. Well, in a lot of countries, including Britain, it, the junior staff, the junior faculty, don't have the independence
Mm,
that the junior staff and faculty will have in the United States. I'm always available to assist, including in the operating room, like I will tomorrow, when I have junior faculty that need a hand or just want to have someone with experience around. But that's the norm in a lot of other countries where training is restricted in hours. So it's a trade-off. Inevitably, it's a trade-off. But at the same time, it does force us to think about, well, how do we make training more efficient?
mm,
And I can tell you right now, the experience you're having is a much better experience than we used to have in the 90s. I mean, in the 90s, we're running around looking for films. We were drawing blood, putting in Swan-Ganz catheters and all of this other stuff that in reality, they were using us as cheap labor. That's how
yeah.
hospitals looked at residents. We were cheap labor. We were paid about $3 an hour, and it was that needs to go, and it did go. You guys don't live that lifestyle now, and with further restriction on time, we would just have to make the time as meaningful as possible. But inevitably, one of the consequences here is, we've had on the ABNS, we've had serious discussions as recently as 2 weeks ago about shortening training in neurosurgery back to 6 years. And if there was a guarantee that we were going to stay at 80 hours, the possibility of going to a 6+1 structure, in other words, you're done at 6, and then your seventh year is essentially a fellowship. And again, like you mentioned, we put out a paper on this last year.
Hmm.
That's the way neurosurgery training is evolving anyway.
Yeah.
And that seventh year is your fellowship year, and then not have to go out and do a fellowship in your eighth year, or like some people at eighth and ninth year.
Yeah.
So If we had a guarantee that we'd stay at 80 hours, that makes sense, and that would be good for residents. And if we're going to go down to 60 hours or 54 or whatever, I don't think we can do that because we can't be assured that people are fully trained by the end of their sixth year.
Well, talking about training, completing training, and these transitions, I think to fill out the sketch of you and your career path, the last thing we have to talk about is your ascension to the chair position at Rush, which happened at historically a very young age for you,
Yeah.
but literally a young age and young within your career path. So, um, tell us a bit about when that happened in your career arc, the circumstances, and how you
Yeah.
kind of fell into the job.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure I'd say fell in. I was drafted.
Yeah.
Um, I had no intention of becoming department chair at Rush in 2005. In fact, I was looking to leave.
Mm,
I had become an associate professor, and I thought at this time in my career, what else might I do? Remember, I wasn't going to stay in Chicago on
right.
multiple occasions, and now I was really not going to stay in Chicago.
Yeah, I'm seeing a kind of like a "It's a Wonderful Life" story about you trying
Yeah,
to go somewhere warm, and they keep.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was looking at other positions in the summer of 2005. And one Friday afternoon, the dean fired the department chair, Lenny Cerullo, and that caused chaos within the department. Um, in reality, what was happening it was that private practice was dragging paying cases out of the institution and
Mm,
bringing them up to a hospital that they privately owned. And surprisingly, deans don't like that.
right.
And yeah, so he got fired. There was a sort of a vacuum in leadership, and the dean had to make a choice about who they wanted to step in. And I was surprised to hear that they wanted me to do it. I agreed to do it because I felt bad for the residents and some of the people that were employed by the department. I agreed to do it until there was a search, and then they could get some. I was too young for it,
Yeah.
and to this day I'll say I was too young for it. And so I agreed to do it. And then I was hearing predictions that everything was going to fall apart because uh, that I was too young, I couldn't do it, blah blah blah, which really pissed me off. Which of course then drove me to make damn sure that things did go well. And then I started hiring people. John O'Toole was my first hire, and then there was a search, and I was chosen with the search, and we had momentum. Then we kept building, and then I recruited Vince Trinellis as program director and director of spine, and he brought some young fellow from Brazil named Ricardo Fontes. That was about 2009, and in reality, if I had a skill set, it was recruiting, and mostly people that were friends of mine. I brought in really, really good people, and the
Yeah.
faculty at Rush are still just outstanding people.
I
And
I want to ask you about that because you when you decided to leave and go down to Mayo Jacksonville, you
yeah,
took all the residents out to dinner and you told us. And I think I said to you that night, we were toasting you and congratulating you, although we were sad that you were gone. I said, your legacy will live on in the department you built. It's an incredible cast of characters that you were able to attract and retain there at Rush around you. And shortly, I want to ask you about resident selection and recruitment and screening. But this group that you put together and held together for a long time, very stable department, you were really able to identify, select, and then attract and get them to come. And that is a real skill that not many people have in general, much less in neurosurgery. So, talk a bit about how you selected these people, and then what some of the, obviously case by case is specific, but how do you recruit people to, uproot their lives, move cities, and come work in a new place?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing is when you do recruit somebody, you have to commit to their success. And you
Mm.
just, I think people know the difference. Like, I really, I want this person to be successful. I'll do all I can to make them successful. And you have to eliminate yourself from the conversation. I mean, a lot of my career goals went up in smoke when I became department chair. A lot of the innovation and research that I wanted to do just never came about because I was supporting other people's research and innovation. I'm finally doing some of that now. Um, so I think that people have to trust you. They have to like working with you. And, um, you just, I looked at it from the residency perspective because I had pride in program having trained there. And I just wanted it to be the best residency training program I could possibly put together. So I would start the morning thinking about the residency program. Then I'd say, well, what holes do I need to fill there? And then that's where recruiting would start. And then some things were just, some of the best recruiting you'll ever do is circumstantial. It's just, Rick Fessler tells me at the AANS meeting one year, I want to talk to you about coming to join you guys at Rush. I mean, sometimes manna does fall from heaven. I mean, and you just have to be ready for those moments. And I'm seeing a lot of that right now in Florida here. I've been contacted by a lot of old friends who would like to come join us. And but it has to be the right circumstance, the right time. There has to be enough business for them, et cetera, because you don't want to bring somebody and then have them fail because
Yeah.
that's your failure. I mean, you want to make sure they're successful. So I would say that that's a big part of it. Um, and not micromanage, just support and let adults be adults. Um, and I think that was just the way I did it.
Phenomenal. Well, I don't want to shortchange you or our listeners to talk about the last career step you made, the move down to Mayo Jacks, but you are on the record already about that.
Yeah.
And I also, we're on the record talking about some of your hobbies before, the Ironman triathlons, the chess, the math problems. But I do, as we come to the close of this conversation, want to hit you with a few semi rapid fire questions, because now that we've sketched out Rich Byrne, the neurosurgeon, and the man, now I just want to throw some questions at you and see what bounces back.
All right.
So it's the day of a big surgery. Do you have any pre-op rituals that you go through, either to get your mind ready, your hands ready, anything that you do before every case to get in the zone?
Well, I'm pretty deep into my career at this point, but I can tell you that that starts the moment I meet the patient and I look at their films. I'm already thinking about, so I'm doing a big acoustic tomorrow and I'm helping out with another skull base case. I have the anatomy memorized.
Mm,
Um, that started early on, and I've been known to dream about the operation the night before. That happens a lot.
yeah.
I'll dream about it the night after, and in the morning you wake up for serious microsurgery. It's 1 cup of coffee, a small cup of coffee, not a lot of coffee, um, and there were times I don't know if you knew this, but there's a meditation room at Rush.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you might find me there that morning if I knew I had a really, really tough case, or if there was times when we'd be running 2 rooms and I'd be tumor, epilepsy, tumor, whatever. And that you're going to need maximum patience during that day, and that there's going to be moments of chaos, and you just have to prep your mind for that. So I'd go to the meditation room and
And
sit.
what's going through your mind while you're in there? Is it, do you meditate? Do you have a prayer? Are you just
uh,
silence and focus, calm?
yeah, silence, focus, calm, and think ahead. I think you're going to need maximum focus today. There are going to be moments when things don't look like they're going right, and you're going to think about this moment of calm, and you're going to bring yourself back to that calm because
Making an anchor.
yeah, you've been doing this long enough to have seen things spin out of control in an operating room.
Yes.
And you're, as Walt Whistler would say, you're the captain of the ship. You can never lose your cool in the operating room.
Hmm.
So just thinking about that moment of calm and getting back to that moment, I can think of a recent operation about a month ago where we ran into tremendous bleeding and brain swelling, and I just you just got to go right to that moment of calm.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you become part of the problem rather than the solution.
Related. Are you a superstitious man? In or out of the operating rooms? Many surgeons have superstitions. Do you?
No, no, and I have favorite numbers and goofy stuff like that, but no, not at all.
Okay. Um, you are a renowned microsurgeon, and all of us who have worked and trained with you hear you talk about microsurgery, the mindset that it takes, the way to set up your arms and hands, the way to think about the anatomy.
Mhm.
When you're interviewing, screening, and selecting applicants for neurosurgery, I know we didn't talk about in our interview, we didn't talk about anything technical,
Right.
dexterous, nothing like that.
Yeah.
Do you even think about, does this person have hands? Or, and if so, what do you look for? What do you ask for? What are your touchstones for if someone has the technical ability to be a neurosurgeon while you're screening them for red flags, personality fit, things like that?
Yeah. From a technical standpoint, it's my bias, and there's probably good reasons for it because I'm not alone in this, to think that athletes and musicians tend to make good microsurgeons, uh, not just because they're used to working with their hands, but because they're used to performing under pressure.
Mm,
So you can think back in our days, some of our residents were played college football, or the, the and they tend to be very good microsurgeons, or they were pianists or violinists. And one of the things about musicians is that they're not just good with their hands and performing under pressure, they're bimanual.
mm,
And one of the most common things that I see in the operating room is someone comes in as an intern or a PGY2. Most surgeons are right-handed, and they'll come in literally to the operating room like this, like they have a spastic hemiparesis. Their left hand is here, and they're out here with their right hand. And the first thing I have to do is grab that left hand and drag it into the field.
yeah,
They're used to everything being right-handed, and you've got to be two-handed in neurosurgery. And as such, there's a bit of an advantage for lefties because they live in a right-handed world.
right.
Your buttons are left-handed. The computer's set up for, I'm sorry, right-handed. The computer's set up for right-handed. Everything's set up for right-handed people. So lefties live in a right-handed world. They're naturally somewhat ambidextrous, but some right-handed folks, literally spastic hemiparesis, uh, PGY1, and then hopefully by PGY4 or 5, they're out here with two hands. And
Yeah.
there's some things that, a left CP angle tumor is better taken care of by the left hand. And I insist on residents working with me that they get comfortable with their non-dominant hand. They're just going to be a much better microsurgeon if they can do it with both hands.
I can attest to that. And I'm a musician. I have a background with multiple instruments, and so I remember hearing you say that comment about musicians and athletes. And I always thought it was about, we have used our hands before, and also the drilling side of things, running drills or practicing scales and things, and music, playing the same piece over and over again reflects the practice angle. But I never thought about the performance anxiety side of things, and that's very true. You get used to not just having the skill, but doing it with people watching in a high
Right.
stakes setting.
Right.
Um, so thinking about the technical aspect of the job, what is the most technically difficult surgery that you've performed?
I would say it might be hemispherectomies. I
Mm,
used to do those when I was younger, because if you try to do it and minimize your footprint, I mean, you can do an anatomical hemispherectomy; it's not hard. But if you do a functional hemispherectomy,
mm,
seeing deep on some of the cuts can be difficult. So maybe that's one of them. But I'd have to say is sphenopetroclival meningiomas, uh, and I've done a lot of those. Giant acoustics like tomorrow, technically very challenging because your goals to protect the cranial nerves, which are very, very thin and stretched out. And if we didn't care about cranial nerves, it'd be easy, but we do care about them.
right.
So I think the posterior fossa tumors are particularly difficult. I would say holoinsular gliomas in an awake patient, trying to preserve those deep perforators, very challenging. But I mean, again, I love those cases.
Yeah.
That's my career at this point is largely skull base and glioma, and that's because I find them technically challenging and interesting, and where I think that's probably where I can have the best impact.
Yeah, and so I also wanted to ask you at this point in your career, and perhaps you could also answer for maybe your first year in practice, what cases, again, not for the clinical helping a patient side of it, but just from your experience as the surgeon, what case, if you've got tomorrow, are you most excited and least excited about?
Yeah, I would say most excited. I love pineal region tumors. Just I love them. CP angle, but I think probably and supracellar, big tumors unwrapping the carotid, the optic nerves, and so on. But I would have to say the insula. I'm
Yeah.
still enamored by the insula because in the 90s, very few people operated in the insula. It was a no-go zone. Now we know what we can get away with in the insula safely and
Yeah.
how to do it. So it's a bit of a frontier.
And what do you dread? What do you look at your docket for tomorrow, you go, "Oh man, I have to what."
I mean, some people might say shunt, but I look at it as every time I put in a shunt is a chance to save somebody's life. So
I know you love a good shunt.
yeah, I have no problem with shunt. Um, yeah, I can't say I really have a case that I dread. I
Well,
just don't.
I guess that's an advertisement for, sticking with it and becoming senior enough that you have really good case selection.
Yeah, but even if I didn't, if I was doing spine surgery tomorrow, I would love it.
Yeah,
Spine surgery, digging through scar, no.
right.
Yeah, I'd rather retire.
Yeah, yeah, and I d
That's
I d I do remember your love of shunt. That was our last case together
yeah,
before you moved, was a good old shunt.
yeah. I,
Um,
I have no. I think you have to keep it in perspective. You literally are saving somebody's life, so it's okay. It's a good operation.
Good. Well, then, so we're getting toward the end now, and so I have two questions left. One will look backward again, one will look forward. And as I said, the luminaries who have been the interviewer in this series before me are, names that I shouldn't be on the same list as. But like a good resident and a good student, I'm cribbing from them, and so I watched those and I took some notes. And Dr. Gupta, I think, did a great job of always framing this conversation as a record for neurosurgeons in the future. And he always talked about neurosurgery 25 years from now and the surgeons 25 years from now, looking back at this conversation, both to make a point, a record in history for you and your legacy and your practice, but also what neurosurgery was like now. So, with that mindset, these last two questions, looking back at the surgeons who shaped you and that you've learned from not only directly, but through reading their works, reading of their work, we all know and talk about Dr. Cushing, Dr. Dandy, Penfield. Who's a neurosurgeon from history? Because I know you're a great student of neurosurgical history. Who's a neurosurgeon from history that we don't talk enough about? Who's someone that the students, the trainees, even people in practice may not have studied their work as deeply, know about it every day, and that we should go back, look at, and appreciate what they did for the field?
I would say Paul Busey. Paul
Mm.
Busey was a remarkable individual, trained at the University of Chicago when there was one faculty member there, was, I mean, trained literally in the darkness of the age, and in 1928 started his residency. At the end of his career, he was chairman at Northwestern, and I remember as a medical student going past this portrait of Dr. Busey, and everyone would, bow in reverence to Dr. Busey, and he trained a lot of great neurosurgeons, and he was a, just a powerful force in neurosurgery. He was one of the founding members of the ABNS, president of the societies, a remarkable individual. Um, and Paul Busey. So that was an easy one. I mean, the beginning of his career, neurosurgery was just a dreadful field. At the end of his career, he was around for CT scanning
Wow.
and microscope and all of the things that have brought us to where we are now.
Got it. And so then looking forward, for the surgeons 25 years from now who may look back, I want them to have a sense of what we anticipate for the advance of technology. And obviously we know that you're optimistic about these things, but I'll put two things together into one question. AI and robots. Are these things going to replace us or enhance us as neurosurgeons?
Yeah, I mean, first things first, I discovered neurosurgery about 37 years ago. And I remember Lenny Cerullo giving a lecture to us in medical school and talking about all of the advancements that have happened during his time since he discovered neurosurgery and how it's a much better field than when he discovered it. And I'll say first off, it's a much better field than when I discovered it.
Hmm.
The technology, the microscopes were primitive. There were no endoscopes. There was no image guidance. There was overuse of retractors and brain resection, and spine was very primitive. There was very, very little spinal instrumentation. There was no such thing as endovascular. Neurosurgery is a much better field now than it was when I discovered it. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is um, I I hope and expect that 37 years from now, when you're looking back, that you'll say, wow, look how much more we've done.
Hmm.
Look at all these discoveries we brought. Look at the misery that we've ended for patients. Look at how we're extending life. Look at how we've cured glioblastoma.
Hmm.
Look at how spinal cord injury is a thing of the past. Stroke, brain injury, all of these things that we still struggle with. I'm hoping that we're going to get answers for all of these things. Um, Regarding AI, I know enough about AI to know that it, it's essentially fancy math. It's 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 a function generator, and it's and it, but at the same time, with big data sets, it's going to show us some associations that humans could never pick up. I mean, when you think about linear and logistic regressions, they're function generators, except it's just a straight line or a sigmoid. That's all. AI programs can find functions that are impossible to even imagine. So I think that AI is going to make big breakthroughs in basic science. Those big breakthroughs in basic science may help us cure glioblastoma, may help us reverse stroke, may slow the aging process. There's so much. It's such an incredibly powerful tool in the future. I think it has a chance to do those things that would have been science fiction in the past. And where we are right now with AI is, again, just getting steps, the first steps. And I'm really pleased to lead some of those efforts in the Mayo system. Mayo is really, really pushing the frontier with AI. And um, I'm surrounded by a lot of really, really smart people and AI engineers and so on that can do these things that we couldn't have even imagined a generation ago. So I think that's going to be part of it. I think there's going to be more technological advances, more imaging advances. I can't wait to see it personally, and I'll be watching this till my last day. Whether I'm practicing is a whole different matter. I hope I've got another decade in me, but um, I'll be watching it forever. And I can't wait to see what your generation and the next generation will bring to us.
Got it. Well, Dr. Byrne, we just hit the hour mark. I do want to thank the AANS, the Leaders in Neurosurgery series, for setting this up, sponsoring the conversation, allowing me to conduct this interview with you, and of course, for you giving your time to do this with me. So, thank you to everyone that puts this together in this series, which is tremendous and is making a real historical record, an artifact to look back on for the surgeons in the future, the students in the future who like we talk about these people, Cushing and Dandy and Busey, um, one day students will read about the surgeons of our time and have a much greater resource to look back on and get to know the people that kept carrying the torch of our field forward. And so it's really an honor to be part of this process and this record. But Dr. Byrne, I'd like to give you the last word. So this whole hour conversation has been an exploration of you as a surgeon and as a person and your trajectory through the field of neurosurgery and the time that you've been working in it. So, just a brief message for those students, trainees, surgeons in the future looking back, um, kind of in summation for everything we've talked about in this hour. Just tell the people who you are and what neurosurgery is to you today as we talk in 2025.
Well, I guess I would just summarize it saying I feel very, very fortunate just to have been a part of it. Um, I I can't believe I've had the opportunities that I've had, and my enthusiasm for neurosurgery is just as big or bigger than when I discovered it 37 years ago. And I think it's probably telling that the my enthusiasm for medicine and my wife's enthusiasm as a neurologist for neuroscience has both of my daughters who are in medical school both looking at what they might do in their career in medicine are it's very clear how much we both love what we do, and that's why they're both in medicine. And I'm hoping for the best for neurosurgery, um, and we'll the folks of my generation have an obligation to make sure that it remains a great field for people like you and for our patients in the future.